Martin Geddes, the brilliant Martin Geddes, the magnificent Martin Geddes, from newsletter.martingeddes.com. And yet, you still kept going and are still here. A little look back at all we have confronted and overcome, by Martin Geddes. Participants in this nonlinear fifth-generation war are having to deal with novel war wounds. Let's contrast our situation with the past. You could have been in London during the Blitz of World War II, with bombs dropping, buildings toppling, ruins burning, and bodies being blown apart. At any time, the Nazis could have invaded, resulting in a brutal land war in our homeland. Yet, despite all this, everyone knew we were at war, and there was a common enemy to be defeated. The enemy was tangible, and we were largely united as a people against it. Today's war is fundamentally different. We have been infiltrated, our respected institutions hijacked, and our population brainwashed and divided. The weapons being deployed are silent and invisible. The essence of the war is the continued denial of its existence. Once the masses are aware of it, the main fight is over, as they cannot be co-opted any longer once we unify. The major risk is not the enemy coming to conquer us by pouring over our beaches, but our descent into rivalry and civil war internally. We have camaraderie among the warriors, but not a unified populace. If World War I's deadly warning was gas, 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 this one's is gaslight, gaslight, gaslight. In traditional war, the traumas tend to be large and immediate, obvious injuries to bodies, horrific displays of death or torture to intimidate the population, destruction of property resulting in direct physical hardship, suffering due to lack of basic amenities like food and power, obvious repression by authorities of basic rights. The conflict is open and undeniable. We have to endure the opposite. A war where everything is plausibly deniable, done with subterfuge, and superficial comfort is maintained to preserve the illusion of not being at war. Many of us are weary at a deep soul level and are experiencing the cumulative effect of micro-trauma, a kind of pervasive background hurt from the constant exposure to wickedness. The injuries are still disabling, just non-obvious and internal. We have been subjected to the most intense psychological and cognitive warfare ever conducted, including using artificial intelligence to manipulate minds and divide people via social media. There are neuro-weapons on the battlefield, including EMFs, DEWs, nanotech, hypnotic devices, pharmaceuticals, GMOs, and poisons in our food and water. Pervasive war leads to new insidious harms. The paradoxical methods of this kind of warfare mean its maximum barbarity has minimum visibility. Everyone is a combatant, from the unborn to those on their deathbed, whether they know it or not. The battlefield is our DNA, the essence of life, whose consequences manifest everywhere. Yet mechanisms cannot be seen. Only some of us are aware we are at war, and therefore we are subjected to the nightmare of watching those co-opted by the enemy destroying themselves, their children, their professional integrity, their cultural inheritances, and their society's future. The nightmare is in the knowing, as much as the hideous actions we know about. The awake are those who perceive the deceptive and devious nature of satanic warfare. The asleep are those in denial of an opponent whose methods are exceptionally refined and unbelievably cunning. The former are forced to watch, as the latter gladly sacrifice themselves and their offspring to a pedophile sex and death cult. Every bond of trust is violated as those who fell under the spell act out the doctrines of destruction, parent to child, priest to parishioner, doctor to patient, teacher to pupil, police to public. The awfulness of it all causes despair. It is relentless. The divide among these groups runs through every family, every church, workplace, school, and club. The asleep sheep slavishly reassure one another of their righteousness and superiority while pridefully comparing themselves to the ridiculous stupidity and casual wrongness of those conspiracy theorists who reject their programmed talking points. There is no way to tell someone who is in a cult that they have been hijacked. There has to be a moment of awful collision with reality that jolts them into questioning, which the rest of us can see coming, yet cannot prevent. The awake stagger on, observing the mental harm and physical damage to their loved ones who remain oblivious to the attack. Meanwhile, the mind violence is constantly reinforced via the mass media, as well as propaganda plastered on our roads, bus stops, store entrances, buildings, clothes, flags, products, and posters. Those who can perceive the hidden intent and decode the symbolism have to watch as those around them blindly follow its directions. Every single trip into the wider society involves some kind of encounter with the enemy's mind control messages. There is no escape from this war, and no way to avoid confrontation with its harmful impact on the empathetic soul. The drain on one's energy is endless. We have had to become aware of our silent enslavement and come to terms with the fraud being perpetrated on all of us by the legal system and tax authorities. Everyday life includes constant bombardment with payment reminders, money demands, license fees that we know to be illegitimate. It is all a giant mob shakedown, a protection racket without the protection. Each of us has to pick our battles, deciding when to pay off the enemy to get them off our back, if only briefly, and when to stick by our principles and refuse to comply. We are asked to pay for our own destruction, and there is no word in the English language that suitably conveys the disgust attached. Many of us who have fought in this war have lost our jobs, careers, friends, homes, savings. We have been socially ostracized and isolated for resisting the deadly collectivist ideology. We have been denounced as political extremists, granny killers, conspiratorial nutcases, cult members, and potential terrorist threats. We have endured the mass depersonalization and fear brainwashing of those around you via masks. We have been deplatformed, stripping us of our participation in the virtual public square. We have suffered economic insecurity and financial hardship. We have seen basic freedoms of travel, speech, and association trampled upon, while it is celebrated by those who nationally supported liberal ideals. To have fought in this war is to have seen the launch of bioweapons of unknown effects and triggers. Informed consent went out of fashion. War crimes became normalized and praised. Schools have turned into indoctrination centers, doctor surgeries into poison dispensaries, and hospitals into death camps. We have had to face down our grounded fears of a zombie apocalypse. Those nanolipids could be remotely burst at any time to release any number of nightmarish diseases, or the nanotech activated to initiate remote control over the population's thought processes and emotional state. We have seen loved ones murdered by medics and buried under false causes of death. We have watched helplessly as the evidence unfolds of unspeakable crimes to children without the ability to act and intervene directly. We have become aware of an even worse fate that was narrowly evaded with military help. We have persevered through the nonstop gaslighting by the media to deny the existence of an unconventional war and our endless involuntary exposure to enemy propaganda messages. We have recovered from the distress from unavoidable deceptions on timeline during war and bruises from patience punches. We have learned to ignore and detach from the name-calling, backstabbing, and gossip. We have endured so much while being denied the cultural and social legitimacy of being genuine warriors in a real war. The Anons, who are fighting on the front line of the information war, were quietly forewarned that they would end up with PTSD, and it seemed a bit overblown at the time. We're still not through all this, and I can feel that I have real health problems with long-term stress and worry. I have chronic injuries from repeated exposure to traumatic situations, family feuds, seeing kids at risk, betrayals of trust, and psychopathic encounters with corrupt authorities. Even writing this essay meant taking a break halfway through, as I can feel the rising anxiety and can't think straight. I'm not fully functioning anymore. I lose focus. I freeze up. I can't even look at content that is visually distressing and involves bodily harm. My ears are ringing. I wake up with all kinds of crazy stuff racing around my head. Being around normies exhausts me very quickly. Being around the awake keeps stirring up my distress. Being alone is painful, but lets me regulate my activity to my energy. The costs of dealing with the intensity of a totalitarian genocide are all coming due. The last time I got on an aircraft was to make an emergency trip in 2021 to visit my younger daughter abroad. I knew that the COVID test could deliver a poisonous payload and harvest my DNA, so I was risking my welfare. The flight experience was horrid and tyrannical, the only time I would wear a muzzle. The bureaucracy and privacy invasion to get travel permission was despicable. I didn't sleep 1 second the night before and used one of my black market modafinil pills to keep me awake, despite it being a nasty and uncomfortable drug. I now associate flying with rape of my bodily integrity and state violence in general. I don't want to go near airports or board a plane. Those family members still under the spell who didn't perceive the danger or wrongness don't understand why I'm traumatized and won't travel around by air on family business anymore. On the surface, it seems a bit pathetic because everything looks normal, but that's because the silent weapons leave invisible wounds. Right now, I don't trust air travel in a post-COVID era. Jabbed pilots, woke airlines, capricious governments. I am not sure if I ever will fly again, and am okay staying put for my own peace of mind. Non-linear war gives you non-conventional war wounds. They are inexplicable to those who remain oblivious to the conflict and its insidious nature. I am sure much of this story will resonate with you, and that you will have your own hurts to tell of too, and yet you and I still kept going. And we are still here. Something in our spirit says we must persevere, must not allow ourselves to be demoralized, must not engage in self-destructive acts. We have seen the evil being perpetrated, with children being the primary target, and refused to cooperate with the wickedness. There is a calling we feel, and we know this is deep down a holy war, and that there is no choice but to fight to final victory or honorable death. Patriots are those who will fight and sacrifice for their fellow man, even while being denounced for doing so, because they know they are being called to a noble and righteous cause. There is no expectation of any personal benefit in this world or assurance of recognition in this life. There may never be a moment of true vindication and catharsis, as those who, newly awakened, remain partially in denial of what the rest of us have been through. They cannot accept in their minds ideas that involve emotional turmoil beyond what they can bear. The satisfaction has to come from looking up and having a clear conscience, not a cross for the plaudits of other men. This is a spiritual war, first and foremost, with mind and body battlegrounds. You have been denied the recognition of being at war, of having fought in real battles that have casualties, and suffered genuine trauma wounds as a result, and yet you and I are still here, and kept going, through all of the above. Your spirit has conquered every obstacle put in your way so far, no matter how wobbly you felt. Sounds like you are a non-linear war hero to me. Maybe you need to credit yourself as such. That is newsletter.martingettys.com, newsletter.martingettys.com. Go there. You can subscribe, become a founding member. It's like $5 a month to support Martin or buy some of his photography. This is a brilliant man. He was doing this before any of us. Absolutely outstanding stuff. All right, one more piece.